And when I read this story of the people of God coming back to Jerusalem to build the temple, I think of this mighty enterprise that they're involved in. And I compare it to any mighty enterprise that we might find ourselves involved in, as a family, as a church family, as a nation, as an individual. And it can be tremendously unifying and invigorating to participate in the call of God, to do what God has called you to do. I think, for example, at my old church on the Jersey Shore, where I served for about 10 years. When I was there on the Jersey Shore, we had this challenge in our community with a lot of drinking and drug use among our young people. We're there on the Jersey Shore, after all. And it was where all the New Yorkers and the Philadelphians would come to party, and then they would go home, and our kids kept partying on the Jersey Shore. They even had a show called The Jersey Shore, and it was not a very good show to watch, let me tell you. But we experienced that. And one of the things we sought to do as a church is to provide resources to help our young people and our families. So we started a Christian counseling center. And it wasn't just our church, but it was together with other churches. We were the leaders of it, and others got involved, individuals and churches. And it was so great to be able to coordinate with the school district and with other churches, resources that would advance mental health and education resources that would encourage quality of life in families. And one of the things that happened is, although it was tremendously invigorating, we did have a few detractors. In fact, some people said, well, this is a Christian counseling center, and they said it wasn't Christian enough. Other people would say, well, it's too Christian. And then there would be some therapists in the community that said, well, we think that this counseling center could steal from our clientele. And so every once in a while, we'd have some little pot shot that would come our way, and one of our founders and a benefactor of the counseling center that we began had this phrase anytime they felt some challenges. She said, remember this, no good deed goes unpunished. You know that's true, right? You ever experience something where you're trying to do what you believe God is seeking you to do, that God is asking you to accomplish? You're trying to do something good or something right or something lovely. And then all that happens is you wind up being punished for it in some way. And you wonder, what good is it for? Well, the children of Israel from the tribe of Judah, who came back from Babylonian captivity into the land of the promised and established themselves around the temple of God in Jerusalem, had this kind of experience. Because as they started to build the temple, there were people living there in the region that came to Zerubbabel, the leader. And they said to Zerubbabel, hey, let us help you. We worship the same God. We sacrifice in the temple like you. We have the same purpose and desire to see this worship of God. And Zerubbabel, don't you love that name? Say that 10 times without giggling. Zerubbabel told them, you know, I can see right through you here. I think you just want to get on the building project so that you can disrupt it and destroy it. And the other people listened to the people volunteering to help, and they said the same thing. Their comment and response was, hey, this temple means more to us than it means to you. Just stay back, let us do it. Just don't be a detractor and get in the way. But unfortunately, the people who were in the area and opposed the building of the temple, they'd just drop these little sarcastic harassment bombs. They'd make fun of the people. They even started a letter writing campaign back to Persia and started to influence the king of Persia. And when you look at the Persians, just much like in America or any country, there's change of leadership. There was change in leadership in Persia. And then there would be Cyrus would be in charge, and then Darius, and then Xerxes, then Artaxerxes, then Xerxes II. And whenever there was a change, the attitudes towards foreign policy changed, just like when we have changes of administrations in different countries. Foreign policy changes. And so these people who were opposing the Jews building a temple would try to take advantage of changes going on in the international scene. And they were always trying to stop it. But the Jews seeking to build the temple persevered. And one of the great resources for their perseverance was the tribulation that they had experienced together. Here these Jews, 70 years earlier, their parents and them had been sent off into Babylonian exile. And for them, it was like a brand new slavery, like being sent back to Egypt once again. And when they were in Babylonian exile, they were so far from the rights and the privileges that they once had. And that experience was a refining kind of experience for them. In fact, some of their Psalms and Proverbs talks about the refining experience that the people of Judah experienced when they were in exile. In Psalm 66, it says, "We have been tried like a crucible, but as the crucible is fired up, the precious metal inside, silver, is shaped." And so the Jews would declare this psalm when they came back from exile, and they say, "We have been tried, but now we are being purified." Or like Psalm 17, like Proverbs 17 says as well. It talks about us being a crucible, being refined. St. Paul says the same kind of thing in Romans chapter 5. You know how he talks about how tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint us. Well, that was the experience of the Jews who returned to Jerusalem to build the temple. And they had been refined in the fire of persecution. Have you experienced that in your own life? Maybe a foxhole experience, a struggle, a challenge. And somehow that experience becomes a purifying experience for you. It happens in our individual lives, and we have a choice. We can get better or we can get bitter. It happens in our family lives, and we have a choice too. We can grow stronger or we can become even more dysfunctional than we are. Happens in church life as well. I think of my church in Ventura County. Before we moved to the Jersey Shore, I served a church for about 15 years in Ventura County. And when I was there, a young pastor with little children, we experienced what I felt was a tremendously refining period in the life of our church through great tragedy. Because on one week, we had a boy in our youth group take his car and combine it together with alcohol and twist it around a utility pole while he was driving. And it killed him. And we had a funeral for this boy, and it traumatized all the young people in our youth group. And the next day after the funeral, my family was going out water skiing, and we decided to take some of the kids from the youth group together with us and some other friends. We had little children and then some high schoolers from the youth group. And as we were out skiing and jet skiing, one of the boys in our youth group was on a jet ski. And as he was on a jet ski, a ski boat came and crashed into him. And I rushed to this boy's side and pulled him out of the water and tried to help him. But he died in my arms. And the grief upon grief that just waved over us and our church and our family and all the events of that day, contacting the parents and contacting all the youth group parents. And this was in 1991. No cell phones then. So we were stuck at a ranger station talking to the authorities and waiting for the coroner and processing through with all the children. And something in those terrible events of those days somehow produced something beautiful in the life of our church. And I think it happened even the day that we got back from the lake. It was late at night. It was 1 a.m. the next day. And my wife and I and our little children, we pull up our car to our house. And outside our house had been sitting this couple waiting to help us take our children into our house who were sleeping in the car. And it was the couple who had lost their son to the accident on the road the previous week. And they carried our children in. They just wanted to show love in the midst of their grief. And the next day was my oldest son's birthday. And we'd planned a birthday party for him. And he said, "I don't believe it's a birthday. I feel like it's a death day." And yet some ladies from the church came over and they helped my wife do a little party, modified party. We had 30 kids coming. And they were with the kids and showed them that life goes on and love goes on, even in the midst of despair and even in the midst of grief. And the week went like that, of hugs and of grace and of love in the midst of those days that even as I describe it now, I'm even dazed to consider what it was like. And yet, the Lord somehow was there in the midst of our grief. And years later, even to this day, I talk with people at my old church and they'll say, those were defining days for us because we became less of a country club church and we became more of the family of God. And I think they're right. And it is so true. When you go through those experiences of life, they define you. And they shape you. And those experiences that the people of Judah had as they went into exile helped define them and shape them. And it made them better, not bitter. It made them more committed to God, and it made them more devoted to seeing the worship of God grow and continue. And you see these descriptions in the book of Ezra where the people of God gather and they yell out to God, praise to you, and they cry out to God, really expressing their great pain and despair. I have some Korean friends who do a lot of crying when they pray. Do any of you have Korean friends that pray at 5 a.m? Lots of my Korean friends get up and they pray, and they have this word, I think it's called fa, and it's just crying out to God. And here is this land that has been dominated by the Chinese and the Japanese and the Chinese and the Japanese and everybody else all around them. And they've always been kind of a lesser class people in all the nations around them. And they feel that nationally, even as Christians, when they pray and they cry it out. Well, that's the kind of tears and kind of crying that the people of Judah did when they returned to Israel. And they came before God in building the temple. They just cried out to God. And this was a passion that they had for God. But not only was it a passion, they reached into their pockets and they brought out money and they contributed to the building of the temple. And also they committed their lives. And when Ezra came in with a second wave of immigrants from the land of Persia and came in with this second wave after Zerubbabel had now established the temple, the people committed themselves to the law of God. And here's where things get really hairy in the book. And I really can't explain it because here you've got these passionate people who are so committed to God. And they've come from a land that was so exclusive, Babylonia, that took away all they owned and all they had and took away all their rights. But this new, more inclusive kind of king came in and let them go back, even gave them their riches back. opened up the storehouse and let them go worship their God. So this was a very kind of inclusive kind of approach to leadership that this king of Persia had, sends them all back. And what happens to the Jews once they get back and they've established themselves? Well, they become even more closed and exclusive themselves. And Ezra makes a command of them, which I think disturbs us all. If you've read the book, you know what he does. You know where I'm going here? Ezra says to all these faithful Jews, I want you to divorce your wives, and I want you to abandon those foreign children in your household. And I want you to be pure Jews. Terrible thought. Now, scholars debate what this command of Ezra means. Some scholars say this is an example of religious passion gone crazy. And we all know about religious passion that goes crazy, right? We've read about the Crusades. We know about the Inquisition. Our ancestors, the good pilgrims, did a lot of good things. Jonathan Edwards is one of my fabulous heroes that came from the Puritan line. And yet, they're the ones that did the Salem witch trials, right? And so, we know about these extremes of religious passion. Is this a case like that in the days of Ezra? Some scholars say this is an example of an extreme time in the life of Israel, and extreme times require extreme measures. And so they'll say, well, this is actually a part of what God's will was for the people. And so there's this debate. It's a debate within Jewish scholars, and it's also a debate within Christian scholars. But I can tell you this. A few things are for sure. Nowhere in the Bible before this and nowhere after this has anyone ever been told to abandon their wife and children. Nowhere. Also, in the history of the Torah, many of the patriarchs and founding fathers and mothers of the people of God married in mixed tribes. And some of the kings married a wife who was from another tribe. And there is, on occasions, no criticism of that. Then, on other occasions, you have the time of the judges. And remember Ruth, this beautiful foreign woman who loves God and marries a man of another tribe? She's in the bloodline of Jesus. And then we have Esther. And she's back in Persia while the Jews are beginning to come back into the land of Israel. And Esther marries a king, and she actually becomes a savior to the nation, saving them. And if you read through the prophets and through the words of Jesus, you have this great concern for the needs of the foreigner and the person who's poor in your midst. And remember, you were once a foreigner too, so care for those who are foreigners. So you have this kind of tradition within the biblical text, and then you have this event that happens. One of the things that this reveals to me is when you get passionate about your faith, it doesn't mean that life all of a sudden becomes easy, does it? But let me tell you this, one thing I am for sure, that I would rather hold tight to God and have faith in God in a time of trouble and run the risk of being too passionate about God than just go on my own and be left alone to my own devices. But while I'm holding on to God, there's some guidance that I have. And here's the guidance. I must remember as I hold on to God that God is a God of love. Jesus taught us that. For God so loved the world. And the way that love is expressed on interpersonal levels is through compassion. And the way that love is expressed on a societal level is through justice. And Jesus expressed it just much as I talked to the children about it today. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. And if our passions, our religious passions, ever take us to any place else besides that, we're going the wrong direction. Let's continue building the temple. Building the temple. It's here. And it's also here. Let us pray.